The Chicago Transit Authority Blue Line runs from O'Hare International Airport through the heart of the city to Forest Park, making 33 stops along the way. On a Tuesday morning in March 2009, it carried approximately 1,200 passengers through those stops between 7 and 9 a.m. Office workers hunched over phones, students with headphones bigger than their ears, nurses in scrubs heading to early shifts at Northwestern Memorial. A handful of tourists who hadn't yet figured out that the Blue Line wasn't the most scenic way to see Chicago's architectural landmarks. And in the second car of the 7:47 a.m. train, wearing a plain baseball cap, a gray jacket he'd bought specifically because it looked like nothing, and the particular invisibility that comes from looking deliberately unremarkable, Michael Bublé. He didn't take the subway often. His life in 2009 had organized itself around structures designed to manage visibility. Cars with professional drivers who knew alternate routes, private airport lounges where no one would approach, hotel corridors where the advance team had already swept through. The infrastructure of rising fame had constructed itself around him so efficiently and so completely that ordinary city movement, just walking somewhere, just riding something, had become logistically complicated and professionally inadvisable. But occasionally Michael would slip out of a hotel alone before the day's machinery started grinding, before the publicist confirmed the morning schedule, before the label representative arrived with talking points for the radio interview. He would simply disappear into a city and move through it the way everyone else did, at the speed of transit, without anyone knowing where he was going, because he didn't know either. It was the closest he could get, in those years, to feeling like a person instead of a product. He'd been in Chicago for 3 days promoting his new album. The promotional circuit was relentless in the way all promotional circuits are. Radio interviews at stations whose formats he'd studied the night before. Television appearances requiring a version of himself that was simultaneously relaxed and electric. Retail store signings where he'd smiled at the same careful distance from 1,500 different strangers. Dinner with label executives who measured everything in metrics and spoke about his music the way engineers spoke about bridge tolerances. He was exhausted in the specific way that heavy public performance creates, not physically depleted, but hollowed out from the sustained effort of being on for days without pause. The subway was emptying him back out, making him anonymous, making him, for 40 minutes, simply a person on a train going somewhere he didn't need to be. He'd taken the Blue Line westward, choosing direction at random, settling into a window seat and letting Chicago move past in gray March light. The elevated sections offered rooftop views of 3 flats and corner stores and the backs of buildings that the city showed only to people moving quickly through it. The underground sections gave way to the particular rhythm of tunnels, light and dark, the squeal of brakes at platforms. Somewhere around Logan Square, a man got on and settled into the seat across the aisle. He was perhaps 65, heavyset, with the comfortable solidity of someone who'd spent a lifetime doing physical work and had made peace with what that work had done to his body. His jacket was worn at the elbows in the specific way that happens from years of leaning on work surfaces. He carried a brown paper bag lunch, not in a tote or a cooler, but a folded paper bag that he balanced on his knee with practiced ease. His hands resting on his thighs were the hands of decades of labor, broad, capable, with thickened knuckles and the kind of calluses that don't fully go away even after work ends. He settled in, looked out the window at the passing city, and began to hum. Michael recognized the melody within 2 bars, or he thought he did. The man was humming "Haven't Met You Yet," the song Michael had written and recorded as the centerpiece of his current album, the song that was currently receiving significant radio airplay across the country, the primary reason Michael had spent 3 days in Chicago doing promotion for an album that would have sold without it. He was humming it with no self-consciousness at all, not performing for anyone, just humming because the song was in his head and his head had decided it wanted out. Except it wasn't quite right. The melody was close, recognizably close, close enough that there was no question which song the man was attempting to reproduce from memory, but something had shifted in the second phrase. Where Michael's original melody rose and then dropped sharply on the bridge, creating a kind of musical catch in the throat, this man's version held the higher note 2 beats longer before descending in a more gradual, almost reluctant arc. A small change in notation, an enormous change in feeling. Michael's original felt like hope checked by realism, the awareness that what you want might not come exactly when you want it. The man's version felt like something different, like patience that had been tested and survived, like someone who had spent long enough waiting for something good that they'd learned to be comfortable in the waiting itself. Michael's first instinct was to smile. People misremembered songs constantly. Melodies drift in imperfect human memory, reshape themselves around the listener's emotional associations, arrive at the ear changed by the journey through someone else's life. His second instinct was to correct it. He was the songwriter. He knew what the note was supposed to be. The man was simply wrong. He opened his mouth, and then he stopped, because the man was humming with his eyes closed. His head was tilted back slightly against the seat, and his expression was one of complete, uncomplicated peace, not performing contentment for anyone, not demonstrating anything, simply existing in a moment of private happiness so genuine it was almost uncomfortable to observe. The wrong melody was making him feel something real. Michael closed his mouth and listened instead. The train moved through Damon, Western California. The man hummed through stop after stop, oblivious to the attention of the Grammy-winning songwriter sitting 3 feet away. His version of the song was consistent. He wasn't forgetting it each time and guessing differently. He'd learned it this way, carried it this way. Whatever version of the song lived in his memory had been there long enough to feel permanent. Michael found himself genuinely troubled, though not in a way he could easily name. The song he'd written was about optimism, about believing that the right person, the right moment, the right version of your life was still ahead of you. He'd written it from a specific place with a specific emotional intention. The original melody embodied that intention, but this man's version, the patient descent, the held note, carried something the original didn't, something more settled, less urgent, as if the song's narrator wasn't hoping for what was coming but had already made peace with waiting for it. Was that wrong? Or was it a more truthful interpretation than Michael had managed himself? He was still sitting with that question when the train reached his stop. He stood, adjusted his cap, and moved toward the doors, but something made him pause before stepping out. "Excuse me," he said, turning back to the man across the aisle. The man opened his eyes. No recognition, just the polite attention of someone interrupted. "From private thought, that song you're humming," Michael said. "It's nice." The man smiled. "Don't you think? I heard it on the radio this week. Something about it stuck with me." He paused, considering. "The original's good, but in my head it goes a little different. I probably messed it up." "Maybe," Michael said, "or maybe you made it better." The doors signaled. Michael stepped onto the platform. He looked back through the window as the train began to move. The man had already closed his eyes again, already humming. Michael stood on the platform at Pulaski until the train disappeared into the tunnel. Then he took out his phone and called his arranger, a meticulous musician named Jonathan Webb, who answered on the second ring. "I need you to meet me somewhere today," Michael said. "I want to try something with it." "Song? Which song?" "Haven't met you yet." A pause. "The album's already mastered, Michael. We can't. I'm not talking about the album version. I want to try something different. I want to see what happens if we change the bridge. Hold the high note 2 beats longer and bring the descent in gradually instead of sharply." Another pause. Where did that come from? Michael looked at the empty tunnel where the train had been. A stranger on the blue line. Jonathan didn't ask for clarification because he'd worked with enough artists to know that creative inspiration rarely arrived through rational channels. "Okay, I'll meet you at the hotel at noon." They spent 4 hours in the hotel suite that afternoon. Michael sang the song 6 different ways, his original version, the stranger's version, and 4 variations that tried to synthesize elements of both. Jonathan Webb played along on a portable keyboard he'd brought from the studio where he'd been working that morning, adjusting arrangements in real time, listening with the focused silence of a man trying to locate something specific in a fog. Jonathan was the kind of arranger who heard music the way some people read subtext, always aware of what was happening beneath the surface of the obvious. He'd worked with Michael for 2 years, long enough to understand that when Michael called saying he wanted to try something with a song, it wasn't a casual request. Something had happened, something had unsettled a settled thing. He didn't ask what, he set up his keyboard and listened. At one point, Michael sang the stranger's version straight through, the held note, the gradual descent, the patience embedded in the phrasing, and Jonathan stopped playing and sat very still for a moment. "That's different," Jonathan said finally, his voice careful in the way musicians get when they're trying to name something slippery. Better or worse? Jonathan considered for long enough that Michael knew he was actually thinking rather than performing consideration. Different, he said again. The original feels like arriving somewhere, like the destination. He paused. This version feels like the journey. Like someone who's been walking a long time and has stopped being in a hurry about it. Which is the song actually about? Jonathan smiled slowly. Both, probably. That's why it works either way. The feeling is large enough to contain both interpretations. They didn't record anything that day. The album was finished, mastered, ready to be pressed and distributed to stores that still sold physical records and platforms that were beginning to make physical records feel quaint. What had been captured was captured. Michael's original version of Haven't Met You Yet would go into the world as written and recorded, and it would do what it did. But something had shifted in how Michael understood the song. He'd written it. He'd recorded it. He performed it hundreds of times in sound checks and concerts and promotional appearances. He knew every note, every breath, every intention behind every phrase. And yet a stranger on the blue line had found something in it that Michael hadn't fully seen, had hummed it wrong, and in doing so had hummed it right for himself, had taken the melody and made it fit his own emotional landscape without asking permission, without knowing he was changing anything, without caring whether the original composer would approve. He just needed a song and found one and made it his. That was the thing Michael kept returning to over the following weeks. Songs, once released, stop belonging to the person who wrote them. They move into the world and people take them and change them and carry them in their own pockets, altered to fit their own shapes. The songwriter hears the original. The listener hears something different, and neither version is wrong. He thought about all the people who told him specific songs had helped them through divorces or grief or illness or joy. None of them were hearing what he'd written exactly. They were hearing their own version, the one their experience had made. The song had become a container, and they'd filled it with their own content. The man on the blue line had simply done it more literally. He'd hummed the melody his way, held the note his life told him to hold, let the descent happen when it felt right rather than when the sheet music said. 6 months later, Michael was performing a concert in Toronto. Mid-set between songs, he told a version of the story without naming the city or the man or the specific song, just the shape of it. A stranger humming a song differently. The question of whether the original or the listener's version was more correct. I used to think, Michael said into the microphone, the arena quiet in that way arenas get when 12,000 people are all paying the same kind of attention, that a song belonged to the person who wrote it. And then I heard someone else's version of one of mine. And I realized the moment you put music out into the world, it belongs to whoever needs it. You can write the notes, but you can't write what it means to someone else. The audience applauded. They always applauded. But some of them applauded longer than usual, and Michael suspected those were the ones who'd had their own version of the experience, who'd found something in a song that the songwriter never put there. The man from the blue line never knew any of this. He didn't know who had sat across from him on the 747 train. He didn't know that his slightly imperfect memory of a melody had given a Grammy-winning songwriter something to think about for the rest of his career. He just knew that there was a song on the radio that made him feel peaceful, and he carried it with him the way people carry good things, not perfectly but faithfully, not exactly right but entirely true. Years later, in 2017, Michael was giving a masterclass to a group of young songwriters. In New York, one of them, a 22-year-old named Lily Cheng, asked a question that surprised him. How do you feel when people cover your songs and change them? Like really change them? Does it bother you that they're not doing what you intended? Michael thought about a Tuesday morning in March 2009. A man on the blue line, eyes closed, held note, gradual descent. It used to, he said honestly. I used to hear a different version of something I'd written and think, that's wrong, that's not what I meant. But I had this experience once. A stranger on a subway was humming one of my songs. He had the melody slightly wrong, and he looked completely at peace. More at peace than I felt when I'd written it, honestly. Lily was watching him carefully. So what did you take from that I was writing about? Feeling, and he was feeling it, just through a slightly different door. Michael paused. The feeling is the point, not the notes. Lily wrote something in her notebook. Michael didn't ask what. He hoped wherever the man from the blue line was, whatever city, whatever train, whatever morning, he was still humming, still carrying his version of something with him, still finding his way to the feeling through whatever door felt right. The song had done its job, not perfectly, not exactly as intended, but faithfully, truly, and that, Michael had learned on a train platform at Pulaski Station while watching a stranger disappear into a tunnel, was enough. More than enough, it was everything.